They say a woman can be two things at once in men's eyes, can be temptation and corruption, can be desired and despised, can be wanted and blamed for being wanted. And I learned this truth when I was 17. Learned it in the careful way men's eyes followed me while their mouths spoke of sin. Learned it in the way they found excuses to stand near me while warning others to stay away. Learned it in the contradiction between their hunger and their condemnation. And I understood that I was not actually cursed, not actually corrupted, not actually wrong. But I was convenient, was useful as a scapegoat, was necessary as the explanation for why righteous men felt things they believed they should not feel. And when their desire became unbearable, they did not blame themselves or examine their own natures. They blamed me, called me curse, called me corruption, called me the source of their sin rather than acknowledging that their sin was their own. And they looked at me with want in their eyes while they pointed their fingers in accusation. And this contradiction, this simultaneous desire and destruction, was what killed me, or what should have killed me. What would have killed me if I had not learned that the only way to survive being made into a symbol was to become actually what they accused me of being. To take the power they pretended I had and make it real. To transform from scapegoat into threat, from blamed into dangerous. And I did this. I became the curse they claimed I was, and I have carried that transformation through decades. Have used what they forced me to become as a weapon against others like them. And I am still here, still alive, still powerful, while they are dust. And their legacy is shame, and mine is survival, and perhaps that is justice enough. My name is Delilah Crane, and I was born in Salem in 1674. Born beautiful in a way that I did not choose and could not hide. Born with dark hair and pale skin and features that made people stop and stare. Born into a body that drew attention whether I wanted it or not. And from the time I was old enough to understand, I was taught that this beauty was dangerous, was a test from God, was something I needed to hide and minimize and apologize for. And my mother dressed me in dark colors and pulled my hair back severely, and told me to keep my eyes down, to make myself small, to never draw attention, to never give men reason to notice me. And I tried so desperately to be invisible, to be unremarkable, to disappear into the background. But invisibility is not possible when you are born conspicuous, when your face is the thing people remember. When simply existing in a space makes you the center of attention whether you speak or move or do anything at all. And I learned young that I would be blamed for being noticed, that the attention I drew was my fault, that men's reactions to me were my responsibility. And this was the first injustice, the understanding that I would be held accountable for other people's thoughts, other people's feelings, other people's actions, simply because I existed in a body that they found difficult to ignore. I was careful, was so careful, never spoke unless spoken to, never looked directly at anyone, never went anywhere alone, never gave anyone any reason to accuse me of encouraging attention, and still the whispers followed me. Still the mothers pulled their sons away when I approached. Still the wives watched their husbands when I was near. And I heard what they said, heard them call me dangerous, call me temptation, call me the kind of girl who would lead good men astray, and I wanted to scream that I had done nothing, had encouraged no one, had wanted only to be left alone. But screaming would only prove what they already believed. That I was trouble, that my presence was disruptive, that I was the problem that needed solving. And so I stayed silent, stayed small, stayed as invisible as someone like me could be. And I hoped that if I was good enough, quiet enough, careful enough, they would eventually see that I was not what they feared. That I was just a girl trying to live without being destroyed by the accident of her own face. The accusations began when I was 17. Began not with one incident, but with an accumulation of incidents. A pattern that built slowly until it became undeniable in their eyes. And it started with the minister's son. Started with him watching me during services, staring at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Made me try to sit where he could not see me. But there was nowhere to sit where someone could not see me. And his staring was noticed, was remarked upon. And instead of his parents correcting him, instead of anyone telling him to control himself, the whispers said that I must be encouraging him, must be doing something to draw his attention. And I was warned by the minister's wife to be more modest, to cover myself more completely, though I was already dressed as severely as any woman in Salem. And I understood that modest was not about clothing, but about existing. That the only way to be modest enough was to not exist at all. And since I could not stop existing, I would always be immodest, would always be encouraging, would always be to blame. The second incident involved a married man, a merchant named Thomas Gray, who came to our house on business with my father, who needed to discuss a shipment of goods. And while he and my father talked, I served them cider as my mother had taught me, kept my eyes down, said nothing, did everything correctly. And Thomas Gray stared at me, stared so obviously that my father noticed and became uncomfortable. And after Thomas left, my father asked me what I had done to encourage such attention. And I said I had done nothing, had only served cider. And my father said I must have done something, must have looked at him a certain way or moved in a certain manner, because righteous men did not stare at young girls without reason. And I should be more careful, should be more aware of how I affected men. And I felt something break inside me, felt the understanding that there was no way to be careful enough, no way to control how men reacted to me. No way to be responsible for their behavior when they would not be responsible for it themselves. And I was being blamed not for what I did, but for what I was, for the body I inhabited, for the face I had been born with, for the simple fact of my existence, in a form that others found notable. The third incident was worse, was an accusation that I had deliberately seduced a young man named Josiah Collins, who had been engaged to marry another girl. And Josiah had broken the engagement, had told his intended bride that he could not marry her because he was in love with someone else. And when pressed, he had named me, had said he loved me and could not imagine life with anyone but me. And I had never spoken to Josiah Collins, had barely known who he was, had certainly never encouraged him or welcomed his attention. But his statement was treated as my fault, as evidence that I had bewitched him, had used unnatural means to make him love me. Because how else could a righteous young man abandon a perfectly suitable bride except through corruption? And the girl he had been meant to marry came to my house with her mother, and they accused me of stealing him, of using dark arts to cloud his mind. And my mother tried to defend me, tried to say I had done nothing wrong, but their accusations were so loud, so certain, so completely believed by them, that doubt began to creep in even for my mother. Doubt that perhaps I had done something without knowing it, perhaps I was cursed without understanding it, perhaps there was something wrong with me that I could not see, but that everyone else could. And I saw this doubt in her eyes, and I felt abandoned. Felt that even my own mother was beginning to believe I was what they said I was. And I had no defense, no way to prove a negative, no way to demonstrate that I had not done something when the accusation was that I had done it through supernatural means that left no evidence except the effect itself. The village decided I was cursed, decided it formally in the way villages make such decisions. Not through official proclamation, but through consensus. through repeated telling of stories until stories became truth, through the accumulation of incidents until a pattern emerged that could only be explained by my being fundamentally wrong, fundamentally dangerous, fundamentally other. And I was avoided, was isolated, was treated as contaminated. And my parents struggled with how to manage me, struggled between defending their daughter and protecting themselves from association with someone the village had decided was cursed. And I saw them choose slowly, painfully, to protect themselves. Saw them begin to distance themselves from me. Saw them suggest that perhaps I should stay home more, should be seen less, should make myself even smaller than I already was. And I understood that I was being slowly erased, was being pushed toward complete invisibility, toward a kind of death that did not require actual dying. And I would have accepted this, would have retreated into complete isolation if that had been all they wanted. But isolation was not enough, because men still looked, still desired, still found ways to see me despite all barriers, and their desire was still my fault, was still my curse, was still something I would be punished for. The witch accusation came from multiple sources simultaneously. Came as if orchestrated, though I do not believe it was coordinated so much as inevitable. Came as the logical conclusion of years of being blamed for men's reactions to me. And it started with 4 women, 4 wives whose husbands had at various times been caught staring at me, caught mentioning me, caught in the act of desire that they immediately disavowed. And these 4 women came together and they went to the magistrate and they said I was a witch, said I was using demonic power to seduce their husbands, said I appeared to their husbands in dreams, said I tempted them with spectral visitations, said their husbands were good men who would never willingly stray except for supernatural influence. And the magistrate listened, and he believed them immediately and completely because their accusation aligned with what everyone already thought. That I was dangerous, that I was cursed, that I was the source of disruption. And I was arrested on a Tuesday morning. Arrested while I was helping my mother with washing. Arrested and taken to the prison without hearing or trial or any opportunity to defend myself. And my mother watched them take me, and she said nothing, did nothing. Simply watched with an expression that might have been grief or might have been relief. And I understood that she too believed I was guilty. That everyone believed I was guilty. That guilt had been decided long before the accusation was made. And the accusation was simply formality. Simply the final step in a process that had been building since I was old enough to be noticed. The prison was cold and crowded, and I was not the only young woman there, was not the only one whose crime was being too beautiful or too confident or too visible. And I met others who had been accused for the same reason, for drawing attention they did not seek, for being blamed for men's inability to control themselves. And we recognized in each other the same injustice, the same rage, the same helpless fury at being punished for simply existing. And an old woman in the cell, a woman named Goody Blackwell who had been imprisoned for 6 months, told us that we were fools if we thought appealing to justice would save us. That the trials were not about truth, but about reinforcing order. About punishing women who made men uncomfortable. About sacrificing the inconvenient to maintain the illusion that the community was pure. And she said the only women who survived were the ones who confessed, who validated the accusations, who played the role they had been assigned. And those women were not released, but they were not hanged immediately, were kept alive in uncertainty, and she said this was by design, was meant to break us, to make us so desperate that we would say anything, become anything, accept any label if it meant another day of breathing. And I listened, and I understood that she was right. that there was no path to innocence because innocence was not the point. The point was guilt. The point was punishment. The point was reinforcing that women like us had no right to exist as we were, had to be either destroyed or transformed into warnings, into examples, into proof that beauty was dangerous, and desire was curse, and women's bodies were weapons against men who could not be expected to control their own reactions. My trial was held 3 weeks after my arrest. Was a performance where my guilt was foregone and the process was simply theater. And the 4 wives testified first, testified about their husbands' reactions to me, about dreams and distraction and desire, and they described it all as my doing, as my active campaign to seduce and corrupt. And the magistrate asked me how I responded, and I said I had done nothing, had never approached their husbands, had never encouraged them, had only existed. And the magistrate said that existing in the manner I existed was encouragement, that my beauty was itself a form of temptation, that refusing to hide myself more effectively was tantamount to invitation. And I said I had hidden myself as much as possible, had dressed severely and kept silent and avoided attention. And he said clearly it had not been enough, that if men still noticed me, then I had not done enough to make myself unremarkable. And I understood that the only acceptable level of unremarkable was impossible, was non-existence. And since I existed, I was guilty. And the trial was simply confirming what had already been decided, what had perhaps been decided the moment I was born with this face, this body, this curse of being noticed. They brought witnesses who testified about my character, about incidents where men had stared or stumbled or lost concentration in my presence, and each incident was presented as evidence of my power, of my deliberate use of witchcraft to corrupt good men, and the accumulation of these small moments, these nothing moments where I had simply been present while someone else reacted, built into a narrative of intentional seduction, of calculated corruption, of me as active agent rather than passive presence. And I saw how effectively they had rewritten reality, how thoroughly they had transformed my existence from innocent to guilty. And I saw too that the men whose reactions had condemned me were nowhere in the courtroom, were not called to testify, were not asked to account for their own staring or desire or inability to control themselves, because their reactions were natural, were understandable, were simply what happened when men encountered someone like me. And the failure was mine for being encounterable, for being visible, for being noticeable, and this reversal, this transformation of their actions into my crimes, was so complete that even I almost believed it. Almost believed that perhaps I had done something. Perhaps I was guilty of existing incorrectly. Perhaps the curse they spoke of was real and I carried it without knowing. And this was the most insidious part of the accusation, that it made you doubt your own innocence, made you wonder if perhaps they were right, perhaps you were wrong, perhaps simply being what you were was crime enough. They found me guilty in less than an hour, found me guilty of witchcraft and using demonic beauty to corrupt Christian men, and they sentenced me to hang in 3 days. And I was taken back to my cell to wait for execution. And Goody Blackwell looked at me and said I had been right to maintain innocence, that at least I would die honest even if I died condemned. And she said too that there were things I should know, things about the women in our cell, about how some of them had found ways to survive that were not confession, about practices that the accusers called witchcraft, but that were really just old knowledge, old ways of working with the world that women had carried for generations. And she asked if I wanted to learn, if I wanted to know what they claimed I already was. And I said yes, Said yes because I was going to die for being a witch anyway. Might as well actually be one. Might as well have the power they said I had. Might as well make real what they had made false. And she taught me in the 3 days before my execution. Taught me words and practices and ways of seeing that transformed how I understood the world. And I learned quickly, learned desperately, learned with the focus of someone who has nothing left to lose and everything to gain. And I felt power wake inside me, felt it respond to the words, felt it grow as I practiced. And I understood that they had been right in a way they did not intend. I did have power, not the power to seduce or corrupt, but real power. Actual magic, and I could use it, would take what they had accused me of and make it weapon, make it shield, make it survival. The day of my execution came and they led me to the scaffold and the crowd was large. Was hundreds of people come to watch the beautiful witch hang, come to see the curse removed, come to witness justice. And I looked out at them and I saw the 4 women whose accusations had condemned me. Saw them standing together looking satisfied, looking vindicated, looking like they had won. And I saw 2 the men, the husbands who had stared, who had desired, who had made me guilty by their inability to look away. And they were there too, watching with expressions that were complex, that held guilt and relief and continued desire even now, even at my execution. And I understood that hanging me would not make them stop wanting me, would not cure them of their hunger, would only remove the object of it, would only give them temporary relief before they found someone else to desire and destroy. And I decided I would not give them that satisfaction, would not die for their convenience, would not be the sacrifice that cleansed their guilt. And I used what Goody Blackwell had taught me, used the words, used the power. And I felt it surge through me, felt it respond to my desperation. And when they placed the noose around my neck, I spoke words in a language I had learned 3 days ago. Spoke them with power I had learned 3 days ago. And I felt the rope weaken, felt the wood of the scaffold respond, felt the attention of the old powers that existed before church and state and righteous men. And the rope snapped before they could pull the lever, snapped and fell away. And I stood there on the scaffold unbound, and the crowd gasped and stepped back. And I saw fear in their faces, real fear. The fear they should have felt all along if I had actually been what they accused me of. And I spoke again. Spoke words of curse. Spoke them at the 4 women who had condemned me. Spoke them at the men who had desired me and blamed me for their desire. Spoke them at the magistrate who had found me guilty. Spoke them at the village that had called me curse. And I told them that they had made me what they feared. That they had created exactly what they tried to destroy. That by accusing me of being witch, they had forced me to become one. And now they would face an actual curse instead of the imagined one. Now they would understand what real power looked like instead of the made-up power they had attributed to my face. And I cursed them to carry what they had done to me. To remember me always. To never be free of the knowledge that they had killed innocents and created danger. And then I ran down from the scaffold through the panicking crowd, ran toward the forest that bordered Salem, ran with power coursing through me, making me faster than I should have been, stronger than I was. And I heard pursuit, but they could not catch me, could not follow where I went. And I disappeared into the forest and into the life I would build there. The life they had forced me into. The life of actually being what they had called me. I learned more over the months and years that followed. Learned from Goody Blackwell, who had escaped in the chaos of my execution. Learned from other women who had fled or been cast out or chosen exile over death. And we built something in the forest. Built a community of women who had been called witches. Some falsely like I had been, some truly, and we practiced together. learned together, became together what we had been accused of being. And I became powerful, became actually dangerous, became the threat they had imagined. And I used that power not for revenge, though revenge tempted me, but for protection, for helping other women escape what I had escaped, for building something beyond the reach of men who blamed women for their own desires, beyond the reach of villages that sacrificed the beautiful to maintain the illusion of purity. And I survived. I survived where they intended me to die, and survival itself was victory, was justice, was the curse I had promised them, that I would continue existing, continue being beautiful, continue being powerful, continue being everything they had tried to destroy. I heard over the years what happened to those I had cursed, heard that the 4 women had grown old early, had lost their husbands to illness or accident, had been left alone with the memory of what they had done. And I heard that the magistrate had died badly, had suffered, had called my name in his final days. And I heard that the village had struggled, had faced difficulties, had lost its prosperity. And people whispered that it was my curse, that I had damned them from the scaffold, that they were paying for what they had done to me. And perhaps this was true, perhaps my curse had power, or perhaps they were simply facing natural consequences. The consequences of being people who destroyed innocence, who blamed the blameless, who made scapegoats of the beautiful. And guilt has weight, carries cost, destroys from within. And perhaps they destroyed themselves more effectively than any curse could have. But they believed in the curse, believed in it absolutely, believed that I had power. And perhaps that belief itself was the curse. The knowledge that somewhere I existed, was powerful, was dangerous, was everything they had accused me of being, and they had created me, had forced me into being exactly what they feared. And now they had to live with that knowledge, had to understand that the curse they spoke of was their own creation, was their own fault, was the direct result of their inability to control their own desires and their determination to blame someone else for that failure. I am old now, much older than I expected to be, older than I have any right to be given, that I should have died at 17. And I still practice what they accused me of, still help women who face what I faced, still teach that beauty is not curse, that desire is not corruption, that being noticed is not crime. And I tell them what I learned, that the only way to survive being called a curse is to become powerful enough that curse and blessing are indistinguishable. That the only way to survive being desired and blamed for being desired is to refuse to accept blame, to place responsibility where it belongs, on those who desire, on those who cannot control themselves, on those who would rather destroy beauty than question their own reactions to it. And I tell them too that survival is its own form of magic, that living when they intended you to die is the most powerful spell, that continuing to exist, to be beautiful, to be powerful, to be visible, to be undeniable, is the curse they really feared. Not corruption, but continuance. Not seduction, but survival. And I have survived, and I will continue surviving. And they are dust, dust that blows away and is forgotten, while I remain beautiful, remain powerful, remain the curse they called me and could not kill. And perhaps that is justice enough. Perhaps survival is always justice enough when survival was supposed to be impossible.